So let's go ahead and erase the board and start actually graphing numbers on the number line. Okay, now we've done a lot in this section. We've talked about numbers. We've talked about categories of numbers, labels for these numbers. We've talked about symbols, greater than, less than, equal to. And we've kind of danced around the issue of a number line, but we've never actually done that and drawn that. So that's what we're going to do now. Imagine all the numbers that you've ever known stretched out on a line. And so, you know, numbers can go on forever, so the number line goes on forever. And it goes off into the positive direction, because the positive numbers go on to infinity. And it also goes on to the negative direction, because the negative numbers also go to negative infinity. And so this line really is double arrow line, and it goes in both directions. So what we're going to talk about now is the number line. And, you know, you need to get comfortable with it, because I'm going to tell you later on when we're going to start adding and subtracting negative and positive numbers, the number line is going to help you do that and help you visualize it. The number line is a very simple concept, just like we talked about. It's a line. The little arrow means it goes on forever, and the other little arrow means it goes on forever that way. Now, in the middle of the line, just like we said, you always have to have a reference point. You always have 0 in the middle. And so over on going this direction, you have your positive numbers. 1, 2, 3, you know, and then you have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and go on forever. I'm only going to draw these. And then going this direction, you have -1, -2, -3, and then keep going, you would have -4, -5, and they would go on to negative infinity there. Now, if I were going to graph a number on this number line, it would be a simple matter of putting a dot wherever I want the dot to go. So if I were going to plot the point -1 on this number line, I would put my pencil right on top of this mark for -1 and put a dot there. This would be the graph of the number -1 on this number line, and you immediately see how it relates to all the other numbers. So if I wanted to put, you know, plot the number -3, I would put a big fat dot on -3. Now notice that even though the numbers on the number line are you know, they're whole numbers, you can plot points in between those numbers. So if I were going to plot the point 2.5 or 2.5, then I would go right between 2 and 3, and I'd put a dot right there, and I would say this one is 2.5. And, you know, this number line, you don't want to put too many numbers here, so you just put the whole numbers, and then anything in between that you plot, you just, you know, put it as best you can. So that is the concept of a number line. It's not a complicated concept. It's a line with numbers, and you use it to represent and plot the points on there. It's going to help you visualize negative numbers and positive numbers, and that's going to be really useful. Now, let's say that I wanted to do a little bit more with that. Let me draw another number line. Right, so I'm going to go do the same thing before. 0, 1, 2, 3, -1, -2, -3. Now, what I want to do here, what if I wanted to graph the inequality x is greater than -2? And when I say inequality, by the way, when something is equal, you know, that would be something that was, you have an equal sign in there. When something is unequal, you call it an inequality. These greater than or less than symbols, they're just called inequality. So if you hear me say the word inequality, it just means it has one of these symbols there. That's it. So what this number means, or what this thing means, is that x, which is some number that you're just trying to represent here on the graph, has got to be greater than -2. Got to be greater than -2. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a circle right on top of -2, because that's a number here, and x is every number bigger than that. So we're going to actually shade the number line, and you do this on your paper. You would literally get your pencil out, and you would literally shade it like this. So this graph is telling you that x is greater than -2. You start at -2, and every number bigger than that is what's represented. Now notice, very, very important, this circle here around -2, it's an open circle. When you have an open circle, when you're plotting these guys, it means that you're representing every point bigger, but you're not including -2 itself. In other words, -2 is not represented here in this little inequality, because we said x is greater than -2. We didn't say it was greater than or equal to. We didn't say it was equal to -2. We just said it had to be greater than. So if something's greater than 1, it can't be 1. It has to be, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. If something's greater than -2, you cannot include -2 in the answer, because we said it's greater than -2. So we put an open circle to remind us that -2 is not really part of this answer, but everything bigger is. All right. Now, if we change the problem, if we change this so that we said it was x greater than or equal to negative 2, that would be something different. And then in order to represent that, the way we would have graphed it, and instead of drawing it again, I'm just going to go right back up here. Everything is exactly the same, except we have to make this a solid circle. Because this solid circle is telling us that, yes, negative 2 is included in that. And it's negative 2, and it's everything bigger than that. So that's very, very important. It's a great place to make a mistake on a test. If you ever see any open circles, then you know that number and that point is not included in the inequality. And if you see those closed circles, then you know that it is. So it's very important for you to know. All right, let's do a couple of additional examples. Let's say, let me draw another number line. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3. Now let's say I wanted to represent x is less than or equal to negative 1. X is less than or equal to negative 1. Well, the first thing you have to say is, well, negative 1 is what I'm looking at, so I have to put a circle here, and it has to be a closed circle. And the reason it has to be closed is because it's less than or equal to negative 1. So negative 1 is included in the answer, and since we're talking about numbers less, we're going to shade this direction. So every number way down here below negative 1 all the way to negative infinity is included in this, in what this is trying to represent, including the number negative 1. And that's why we have a solid circle there to remind us of that. So don't get too confused, and definitely don't make any mistakes with the open versus the closed. You have to pay attention if it's less than or equal to, or if it's not equal to as well, and that's why that's important. Now let's go on and do something similar. But in this case, we're going to do a little bit different. I'm going to draw something on the number line. 0, 1, 2, 3, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to first draw it, and then we're going to write down the inequality that it represents. So let's put an open circle here, and let's shade this direction. Okay. And let's go ahead and put an open circle here, and let's shade this direction. Okay, so we have two open circles, and they're both going opposite directions. Now the question is, how do you write that down? What would be the inequalities that you would use to represent that? Well, it looks really confusing, but you need to break it down into two parts. You have this part, and you also have this part. So let's write that down. This part is going to be x is less than negative 3, and the reason is because, of course, it's less than negative 3 because we've shaded that. It's an open circle, which means we're not going to have any equal sign here because negative 3 is not included in the graph. We also have a second part, and this is going to be x is greater than 1. Again, it's an open circle, so you don't have an equal sign here, and it's greater than the 1, so we're going to have it like that. So this really is the answer. It's two separate little inequalities, and that's what's representing the graph, but you can combine them. And a lot of times they'll do this on your test, and it confuses people for no good reason. And so let me show you. The way you combine these things is write your x in the middle. So what we do is we write x in the middle, and we say x is greater than 1, which is exactly what we have here. So far we haven't done anything other than rewrite down what we have. But we also say that x is less than negative 3. And so here we've combined the two things, but in order to read it properly and to not get too confused by it, because it does look confusing, I'll admit to you, you have to start in the middle. A lot of people try to start reading it over here, and it gets really confusing. Read in the middle. X, so forget about this. X is greater than 1. Okay, great. X is greater than 1. It's not including 1, so there's no underline here. It's just greater than 1. So that's what happens if you cover this part. Now, if you cover this part of it up, then if you read it properly starting at x, x is less than negative 3. X is less than negative 3 because the arrow is pointing to the smaller thing. So x is the smaller thing. X is less than negative 3, reading it from the inside out. And x is less than negative 3. And that's why we have it written that way. So if you try to start reading it here, you can do it. I'm not telling you that you can't do it. But for me, it's always easier if you start in the middle. X is greater than 1. Okay, that's what I have. X is less than negative 3. Okay, that's true. This is what you'll see a lot of times on your test. Sometimes they'll give you something like this, and they'll say graph it. The first thing people do is freak out a little bit and panic. Just cover up half of it and graph that, and cover up the other half and graph that, and you'll be in really good shape. Let's do one more similar to that. It's an important skill to have. It's an important skill to have. So we'll have 0, 1, 2, 3, -1, -2, -3. And let's say the graph that we're after is going to be, let's change colors a little bit. Let's say -2 we're going to have a dot on, and +3 we're going to have a dot on, and we're going to shade everything in between these two dots. Question is, what inequality or inequalities could be written to represent that? And so again, you have to take it one step at a time and put them together without trying to go straight to the final answer. You need to work in steps. So what you need to first look at here is say, okay, x is greater than or equal to -2. Because here's -2, here's a solid dot, so it's greater than or equal to -2 because the shading goes on to the bigger numbers. So it is greater than or equal to -2. However, it doesn't go on forever and ever, so we also know that x is less than or equal to +3. X is less than or equal to +3. It has the little equal sign there as well because you have another solid dot. Okay, so this by itself would be solid dot going on and on to infinity. This by itself would be solid dot going on and on to -infinity. But together, when you put them together, it just represents the range of numbers here. Because when you put them together, the way you would write that, you put x in the middle and do exactly what I said. You would start with one of them, greater than or equal to -2, just rewriting this, and also less than or equal to 3. And if you look at it, this part is just totally rewritten over here. And then all the other stuff on this side, right here, is just this, but flipped around a little bit. So the arrow's pointing to x, here the arrow's pointing to x. Big part is pointing to 3, big part's pointing to 3. So this is really exactly the same thing as this, it's just written with x in the center. So the way you read it is you start in the middle and you say x is greater than -2, check, and x is less than or equal to 3. So x is greater than or equal to -2, and x is less than or equal to 3. And so you put those two things together, it's representing the region of points between those two numbers and including those two numbers because of the solid dots there, because that's what that represents. So this is, there's probably a fancy word for it, but basically it's a double inequality. It's when you're describing a range, or you're describing two parts of the number line, and using both of these together, you can rewrite it. So don't be afraid to look at this and pick it apart to graph it and go in reverse, or if you're just looking at a graph, write them down individually and then combine them into something like this.